Okay. All right, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to call this meeting to order. First of all, we're going to read our notice here. Due to efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect all individuals, the council chambers of Town Hall will not open to the public to attend council meetings until further notice. Members of the public who have an interest in a matter listed on the agenda may, up until 10 a.m. on the day of scheduled council meeting, email councilagenda@orangeville.ca indicating your request to speak to a matter listed on the agenda. A phone number and conference ID code will be provided to you so that you may join the virtual meeting and provide your comments to council. Members of the public wishing to raise a question during the public question period of the council meeting may begin at 8:30 p.m. on the evening of, is that correct? What time? I'm sorry, 8:30 on the evening of the council meeting by calling 1-289-801-574, conference ID 264-779-150 #. Correspondence and emails submitted will be considered as public information into the public. Okay, so we're going to start with singing of our national anthem. We have with us Morgan Taylor. Again, Morgan, thank you so much for joining us and helping us out.
Hi, thank you.
Over to you, dear.
Thanks. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us commend. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Very good. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you. Have a great meeting.
Yes, thanks. Okay. The next item here is our land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Are there any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest by any of the council members? Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of our agenda. Can we have a motion to approve the agenda of July 13th? This is the amended agenda of July 13th, 2020. Councillors? Yes. Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Peters. All in favor?
Yes.
Okay, that's passed unanimously. Thank you. Now, item number 8 is the adoption of minutes of previous council meetings. This is a recommendation that the minutes of the following meetings are approved: the June 15th, 2020 council meeting, the June 15th, 2020 public meeting, and the June 22nd, 2020 council meeting. May I have a motion? Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. So for those following at home, item 9.1 has been pulled from our agenda tonight. I just wanted to make a statement about what is happening here. For those watching at home, I just want to say a few words about the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I believe the consultant did an excellent job reviewing our facilities, engaging with the public, staff, and council. The 500+ page document was delivered to council last Wednesday and included in a 903-page agenda. Councillors have not had enough time to wade through this document. We've decided to pull the consultant's presentation from tonight's meeting and call a special meeting of council on Monday, July 27th, to devote the entire meeting to this important document. Over the next 2 weeks, councillors will have an opportunity to review this document and prepare questions for the consultant. We want to thank our consultant, Think Design, for accommodating this request, and to town staff as well for accommodating this request. With respect to the Mill Street Library, in December, it was announced that the federal and provincial governments were opening up the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, the community, culture, and recreation stream specifically. The upper levels of government have 5 main funding streams to municipalities: public transit, green, trade and transportation, social, and rural and northern communities. These funding streams open up only every few years. That being said, we decided to put a very comprehensive application supported by several adjacent municipalities. When the ISIP program was announced, Town Council gave direction to town staff to prepare an application, and after much discussion, the target for funding was the Alder Street Recreation Complex. The grant application included an expanded swimming pool, additional hockey rinks, and a 16,000 square foot state-of-the-art library. If that upper level government grant is approved, the headquarters for Orangeville Library will likely be moving to Alder. At no time did any member of council suggest that the Mill Street Library would be closed. However, this recreation plan is suggesting perhaps a satellite branch and some repurposing of the building, likely for other cultural programming. People should not believe what they hear on social media. Do some fact checking, and if you want clarification, members of council can provide you with good information. This council is working together for the good of all our residents, and I'm absolutely certain that common sense will prevail as we work towards improving the town, always keeping our eye on the tax burden. Deputy Mayor McIntosh, you wish to make a comment as well.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Yeah, thank you very much. I want to echo the mayor's sentiments. I've received a lot of emails in the last couple of days, some actually quite rude, to be frank. One of the items talked about in this study, obviously, is a closing of the Mill Street Library, or suggestions of closing it. Again, this has not come from council. This came from the consultant. I don't think any member of this council has any wish to close the Mill Street Library. So I just wanted to make that clear. And, you know, please, if you're sending emails to us, please make them respectable. It just leaves a bad taste when you get emails like we've been getting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Moving along on our agenda, we have the 9.2 is. Are you receiving the resolution? Oh. Or are you going to do that later? I guess we can do that now. So what council has we've decided tonight is that we're going to have a motion to receive this document. And the more fulsome discussion will be had on July 27th. But we do need to receive the consultant's document. So could I have a motion to receive this document? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. Everyone in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? No. That was so that document's been received, and all councillors will be taking a lot of time over the next couple of weeks to wade through this document, and we look forward to the meeting on July 27th. Madam? Yes, I can do that.
So there's some printed on the agenda. This was after the printing of the agenda.
Would you like me to read out each name?
Just
okay. So Madam Clerk is asking me to acknowledge receipt of correspondence by the town, and I will read the names off. These are with respect to the consultant's report, the Parks and Recreation Plan, and many of the comments were regarding the Mill Street Library. The BIA has sent in a correspondence. Deborah Pierce, Ann and Jim Richardson, Margaret Finlayson, Mike O'Meara, Josie McNabble, Vivian Petho, Linda Lenny, Neil Overbeek, Kimberly Van Ryn, Brandy Robinson, Nicole Agar, Nancy Angrove Urikar, Tracy Armstrong and Linda McDougall, Diane Bator, Betty Lou Boyd, Sylvia Bradley, Paul Charbonneau, Laura Cherry, Jennifer Cluley, Faye Corbett, Kathy Dave, Emily Dixon, Emily Dixon, Deborah Durant, Jennifer French, Jane Forney, Ann Johnson, Christine Kennedy, Diane Large, Ilana Little, Jim McGregor, Michelle Maycock, Ian McCallum, Scott McDonald, and Brianna Atherton, Ardith Merton, Christy Naherniak, Gillian Northgrave, Laura Orford, Michelle Perry, Harry Posner, Tess Prendergast, Susan Reynolds, Andrea Rideout, Chris Riddle, Vivian Riddle, Josh Inglis, Anita Rowland, Amber Schmidt, Elizabeth Scott, James Setterfield, Rayanne Shepard, Andrew Stewart, Shannon Sterling, Whitney Sweet, Hayden Thomas, Tanya Upshaw, Pat Vipon, Kristen Webb, Jamie Wilcott, Penny Willis, Sonia Walter, Marie Darsh, Wes Herder, Jamie Herder, Avery Herder, and Tyler Herder. And we had a petition received from the Rebecca Hills Improvement Committee with a number of signatures on the Rebecca Hills Park petition. So thank you to all those folks who have sent in their comments with respect to Parks and Recreation Plan, Mill Street Library, or in the case of Rebecca Hills, the Parks area. So thank you very much. All right, let's go back up then to 9.2, which is a presentation of our auditors. RLB, Murray Short of RLB Chartered Professional Accountants. Mr. Short, are you on board, sir? Oh, Nandini, okay, I'm sorry. Our treasurer, Nandini Syed, is going to be speaking first, and then we'll bring Mr. Short in. Madam Treasurer, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I will be introducing our 2019 financial statement, which I'm very excited to present tonight, which has been prepared by our auditors at RLB. So if Your Worship, give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay. So as I mentioned, our 2019 financial statements have been prepared through RLB, our audit firm, and will be presented tonight by our auditor, Mr. Murray Short. We were aiming to present these statements back in April, but as Council can fully appreciate that these were delayed due to unavoidable circumstances due to COVID-19. Now, while Mr. Short will be presenting the entirety of these statements, I would like to briefly speak to our 2019 surplus position. But before I do that, I just want to take a moment to thank our amazing finance team as well as our audit team at RLB. So, through Your Worship to Council, as you are aware that municipalities plan their budget on a cash basis, whereas under the provincial regulation, we have to present our financial statements on a full accrual basis. And the difference between accrual versus cash is essentially net adjustments of reserve transfers, cost of amortization, change in any unfunded liabilities, proceeds from any long-term debts, as well as any change in equity. So in 2019, the accrual surplus is a little over 13 million, which is fairly comparable to 2018 accrual surplus. On the cash basis side, between 2019 and 2018, we're looking at 6.8 versus 2.1. So the variance of 4.7, although it looks like that our cash position has gone up substantially, in fact, this 4.7 is made up of these two numbers. So the first one is a change in unfunded liability, which is 1 million financing for Harvey Curry capital project. And the second one is the proceed from the Infrastructure Ontario funding for the wastewater plant expansion. So these two anomalies will not be present in any other year. So when we adjust for these two anomalies for 2019, we're looking at a net cash position of 2.3, and as council can see that this is fairly comparable to last year's. In fact, the increase is only a little over 200,000, and most of this is impacted by wage gap during the year. So that being said, I will be available at the end of the presentation together with Murray and myself. We will answer any council question. At this point in time, I will hand this over to Murray Short.
Welcome, Mr. Short.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Appreciate the draft audited financial statements as well as our graphs showing key operating measures for the year. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, just share. Give me a moment. Okay, I believe council should see the front page of the audited financial statements now in front of them. Is that?
Yes.
Good, excellent. Okay, so these are the draft audited financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2019. They are in draft subject to council's review and approval, so I will kind of scroll through them. After which, obviously, there'd be an opportunity for council to ask any questions of Nandini or myself, and then subject to that, I believe there's a motion in the agenda to approve the drafts. The report itself begins on page 3. It is the same clean audit opinion you've seen and expected from our firm and previous auditors in the past. The most important paragraph from that standpoint is the second paragraph, opinion heading, where we're saying that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. The rest of the report gives some information on the audit process, the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance, which ultimately is council, as well as some information on our responsibility as your auditors. Again, it's in draft, so the report is unsigned, subject to your review and approval tonight. Page immediately after the audit report is the statement of financial position. This shows the assets, liabilities, and non-financial assets, and ultimately the accumulated surplus for the town for the year ended December 31st, 2019, as well as comparatives at December 31st, 2018. A few comments here. So you can see the very top line cash position is actually up by about 19 million. I'll get to that in a minute. Part of that is the $6.85 million that Nandini referred to, and I'll point that out in the financial statements later on as well. The reason for the significant increase in cash primarily is that surplus, as I mentioned, but also a significant increase in your reserves and reserve funds. Part of that is included in the deferred revenue line. You can see under liabilities, that's up by about $4 million. There's also about a $10 million increase in other reserves and reserve funds that are included within the accumulated surplus on Schedule 3. So we'll get to that when we get to that schedule. In short, there's a small surplus, a relatively small surplus. Most of the increase in cash, restricted cash and temporary investments is coming from capital funds, other funds set aside for future expenditures, which are included in that deferred revenue and reserves and reserve funds. You can see in terms of other financial assets, generally fairly consistent. Taxes receivables down slightly. Accounts receivables actually down very significantly. That's just a timing thing in terms of receiving some grant funding and other monies. There was more outstanding at the end of 2018 versus 2019. And then your investment in government business enterprises, that's the town's investment in Orangeville Hydro, and that's just up slightly because of the income in that investment in the year. Down below that, we have liabilities. Those are up by about $4 million, most of that being the increase in your deferred revenue. Deferred revenue in this case is your development charges, gas tax, recreational land, and other reserve funds set aside through legislation or some of your agreements, like your gas tax agreement. Those are up because less was spent out of them than was received into them, and we'll get to that in the notes. But each of those components are up fairly significantly. You can see other components of liabilities and the promissory note that Nandini had referred to in terms of the increase in borrowings impacting your cash surplus or general fund surplus. Accounts payable is down somewhat just because of timing. Long-term debt, you've repaid your other loans over the course of the year. And then some other liabilities related to post-employment and landfill post-closure costs. In total, net financial assets up by about 13 million, again, largely because of funds being set aside in reserves and reserve funds for future expenditures. And then down at the bottom of the statement, we have the non-financial assets, primarily comprised of your tangible capital assets. That's your increase, your investment in infrastructure. You can see that that's down slightly because of amortization being in excess of new capital asset purchases in the year. And we'll get to that in a future schedule as well. So in total, the accumulated surplus down at the bottom up by that 13 million that Nandini referred to, and which we will see on the next page here. So this page is the statement of operations. You can see it's comprised of revenues and expenditures in the year. This is on the accrual basis, as Nandini has said, so it reflects, rather than cash basis, it reflects amortization of assets rather than assets purchased, as well as some of those other adjustments that Nandini discussed when comparing accrual versus cash-based accounting. So just a few comments here. You can see taxation revenue up slightly, but less than 3% on the year, including supplemental taxes and other charges. Fees and user charges down slightly, grants down quite significantly. So this is grants coming from the federal and provincial governments, and we have a breakout of that in the notes as well. That can vary, or those grants can vary fairly significantly from one year to the next. So we'd expect to see quite a bit of variability in that line in particular. Other income includes use of some of your development charges and other reserve funds, and that's the reason for that increase in that line. And then your equity income from Orangeville Hydro down slightly, but still a significant component of your income in the year. Below that, we have the expenditures. You can see that generally speaking, expenditures are fairly consistent across the board for various departments. We do have a breakout of those expenditures in more detail in one of the schedules, but this just gives the totals by department. In total, your expenditures down by about $870,000, and that's part of the reason for the annual surplus of $13 million at the end, which increases your accumulated surplus up to the 228. The next schedule shows the change in your net financial assets, I should say. So it kind of adjusts for the impact of tangible capital asset activity in the year. Because you acquired less intangible capital assets this year than last year, and less than you budgeted to, your non-financial or net financial assets increased more than they did last year. In other words, because you spent a little less on capital, your financial assets, being cash investments and those sorts of things, increased correspondingly. And so your net financial assets increased by 13.8 million up to the 23.98 that you can see there. And similarly, on the next page, which is the statement of cash flows, you can see the increase in your cash position totaling $20 million, again, for largely the same reasons. So you had a bit of a surplus on a cash basis after reflecting capital asset activity. Largely, ultimately, it comes down to the fact that you put a lot more money aside into reserves and reserve funds. You spent a little less on capital than you'd intended, and then the debt and other things that referred to also impacting your cash position. Ultimately, your cash position, all told, up by about $20 million. The rest of the statements have a number of pages of notes with accounting policy information. We get to more detail on the financial statements themselves. At the bottom of page 11, there's a bit of information on the temporary investments held, conservatively invested in money market funds and term deposits, which, considering the volatility of the markets recently, is probably very important. There's information on your investments in government business enterprises, which is Orangeville Hydro primarily, as well. Information on tangible capital note, as I mentioned, which was increased in the year. And then your deferred revenue. So these are the obligatory reserve funds I mentioned. You can see a total up by about $4 million, development charges up by about $1 million, gas tax up by about 1.6 million, and you can see some of the other increases, recreational land up by about 400,000 and so on. So again, that's all money that's been received that hasn't yet been spent. Most of it available then for capital projects and other expenditures going into the future. We have a note on post-employment benefits. So you have obligations for post-employment costs, benefits, sick leave, WSIB obligations, and those sorts of things. So there's liability set up for those. And then we have the long-term debt note. So all of the loans that the municipality has have been paid down over the course of their regular repayment schedules, outlined in this note, and ultimately the repayments for those over the coming 5 years and then beyond the 5-year point, down at the bottom of page 50. The rest of the notes are primarily descriptive in nature, giving some information on the amounts raised and paid out to the school boards, other information in there. Other income just gives a breakout of that revenue line on the statement of operations. Again, as I mentioned, the increase coming primarily because of money used from the development charges and recreational land reserve funds for capital projects. You can see that amount there being the primary reason for the increase. And then we have the note on grants, and you can see that the municipality does receive a fair amount in grants, although the amount is down by about $2.3 million compared to the prior year. And that's just subject to the granting programs available in any given year, the priorities of the programs, and whether some of your projects would fit based on the assessment of the different governments or departments in question. There's a note on the trust funds. There's separate schedules at the back that outline those, so I won't cover that in any. Note 15 just describes in a fairly high level the investment in Orangeville Hydro and the status of its financial statements. And then we have a fairly extensive note on financial risk management, just highlighting kind of financial risks in terms of terms for investments and those sorts of things. Nothing too extraordinary to highlight significant changes in those. Most of your investments are fairly short-term in nature. You do have some long-term debt that's repayable in the schedule outlined. Note 17 is kind of a more detailed description of what Nandini was highlighting. So this takes the $13 million surplus, brings it down to the $6.85 million general surplus that she referred to, and the two lines that she pointed out in particular impacting that, the change in unfunded liabilities and the prior year capital project expended lines. So those are the ones that impacted most significantly the general fund surplus. Rest of the notes are entirely descriptive. I'll jump right to the schedules, trying to do this on a fairly high level here. So Schedule 1 is the schedule of segmented disclosure. This breaks out the revenues and expenses by department and by type, so it gives more detail than was shown in the statement of operations. You can see that revenues were shown by type in the statement of operations. This breaks them out by department. The expenses in the statement of operations are broken out by department, so this shows all the types of expenses here with comparatives in the prior year. And so you can see in more detail where the money's coming from and where it's being spent. Schedule 2 is the schedule of tangible capital assets. So this shows the activity in terms of capital asset additions being $7.1 million, amortization being 7.6, and the change based on the type of assets held by the municipality. And lastly, Schedule 3 shows the accumulated surplus. So this is the $228 million that we saw in the statement of operations and the statement of financial position, broken out by type. As I mentioned, a large reason for the increase in cash is the increase in reserves and reserve funds. You can see the $10 million increase down at the bottom here, as well as your investment capital assets. You have your unfunded liabilities, post-employment benefits, and those sorts of things, your equity in Orangeville Hydro. And then this is the general fund surplus that Nandini had mentioned. Again, because of a couple of one-time factors, it's higher than you would expect it to be, but that's just in terms of those two one-time factors that Nandini had highlighted. And the rest of the financial statements are the trust funds. They just kind of give a breakdown of some of the various funds held in trust by the municipality and the changes in those funds here. There's some bit of money coming in, a bit of money being spent, particularly in the development fund, but those are fairly consistent year over year, so not too much to add. I'd be glad to take any questions now if that would be beneficial, or I can jump right to the graphs if that would be preferred by your worship and council.
Why don't you finish the graphs off, Murray, and then we'll have the questions.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to try to switch to them here. Are you seeing a pie chart on the front now? Or are we still seeing the financial statements?
Still have the financials up.
Okay. Let me just stop sharing for 1 sec. Okay. I believe you should see the graphs now.
Not yet.
Let me try again.
Okay. There you go.
There we go. Excellent. Okay. So this first page in the graphs just shows your expenditures by department. Just purely for informational purposes, it kind of gives a bit of a sense of the diverse nature of the municipality's operations. Whereas a number of our municipalities would be more heavily weighted to transportation services. Some of them that have some greater infrastructure have environmental services. You can see that your municipality is more evenly split amongst various departments, and in fact, protection services being the highest expenditure, followed by environmental and then transportation. So you can see get a sense of the mix and how that's changed over the past 5 years. As I commented last year, and I'll comment again, the town of Orangeville is larger than many of our municipalities. We audit a lot of the rural municipalities outside of Orangeville as well in Wellington County. And so in order to try and compare apples to apples, we compare some of these stats as a percentage of total tax revenue. So as a larger municipality than some, your tax revenue is higher, and therefore your taxes receivable would be expected to be higher, as an example. And so that's how we're trying to normalize the size of the municipality. And so that's what the note is here. And it can comment that your taxes receivable is significantly lower than the average for other municipalities, even when normalizing for total tax revenue. You can see the blue line here, much lower than the red line, meaning your tax receivable is only about 7% of your total tax revenue. And that's certainly a positive from the standpoint of the collections done by municipal staff. This assets versus amortization. So amortization obviously is just a charge taken to draw down the value of your assets as you use them up over time. It's a bit of a artificial measure of the use of your assets. But what we like to see is the blue line, generally speaking, being above the red line more often than not. That's a suggestion, at least imperfect maybe, but a suggestion at least that the municipality's funding its infrastructure well. The fact that it dipped down a little below in 2019, I think is more to do with the timing of projects. As I mentioned, you budgeted to do a lot more in capital than had occurred, just because of the timing of payments, the timing of invoices, the timing of work being completed, and those sorts of things. So it's not a concern, and it's right around the same ballpark. So it's not like it's significantly below. And certainly the past few years, you've spent more than amortization, which again is probably a decent indication that you're trying to stay on top of it. The top graph on the next page shows that same line as far as your capital asset expenditures. The red line here is the change in capital reserves and reserve funds. And so although you spent a little less on capital expense and reserve funds increased by over 5 million, and it's 6 million and change. And so that's a positive sign. It means that although you didn't spend as much on capital, you did set aside some. And again, that's a large reason for increase in your cash position at the end of the year. And the green line is just capital grants. And while you have had some success getting capital grants the last few years, there's not as much money coming out of the federal and provincial governments for capital now than there would have been 10 or 15 years ago, unfortunately. And so a lot of the funding of your capital projects needs to come from your own sources. And so maintaining and augmenting those capital reserves and reserve funds is particularly important. So this graph shows, again, the green line being your capital expenditures, the blue line being your long-term debt. So as I mentioned, the municipality's paid down its debt over the last several years. And so you can see that blue line has dropped significantly. The red line is the average of other clients in terms of their debt. And so your municipality has less debt on average than a lot of our municipalities. So that's a positive from the standpoint of the fact that you're maintaining your infrastructure and you're not overburdened by debt. So while you do have some loans funding some of your major capital projects in the past, it's certainly not an excessive amount. So the two graphs on the next page show the status of your reserves and reserve funds. Again, it's compared to our other municipal clients. Take it with a grain of salt. These graphs basically are an indication of your reserves and reserve funds relative to your tax revenue. Again, that's to try and normalize for the size of the municipality, but what it doesn't do is compare to what future needs may be in one municipality versus another. As accountants, we look backwards. It's your engineers that look forwards and check what your needs are for capital expenditures into the future, and your roads and environmental services departments looking at what their asset management plans need to be going forward. That's not my area of expertise, so this is just showing the status on a dollar basis of your reserves and reserve funds relative to our other clients. And you can see now has exceeded the red line, so your reserves and reserve funds are a little bit stronger than the average of other municipalities. From the graph status of your capital assets. So this is showing a percentage of the original cost that's still sitting on the books, meaning the unamortized cost of your capital assets. The higher the line would suggest that your assets and your infrastructure is newer relative to a lower line. And so I think it's positive to say that the blue line here is significantly above the red line, meaning that your infrastructure hasn't been amortized as much as the average of other clients. Excuse me. Again, it's an imperfect measure, and it's comparing to different size municipalities with different infrastructure needs. But I think it's a decent. It still makes a decent point that your assets are not as amortized, and I think that's still worth mentioning in spite of being a measure. So those are the graphs. Hopefully they give a bit more context to the financial statements themselves. I'd be glad to answer any questions that your worship or council may have.
Great, I've got one right out of the gate here, if you wouldn't mind, Marie. So the town's got a number of real estate assets, and some of them maybe we're looking at selling some of them. And the value of them is much higher than we had acquired them at. Is there capital gains to be paid by a municipality when it disposes of real estate asset?
No, the municipality shouldn't be subject to any sort of tax on any disposal of property. So you're right, they will be at presumably a much lower value than what the fair market value will be that you'll be selling them at. You will have a gain, but there shouldn't be any tax incurred by the municipality on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, Councillor Sherwood, and then Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Okay.
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Short, for your presentation. One of the things that you alluded to in your comparators is that these are your current clients. I'm going to assume that most of them are rural clients then, of farming communities?
Yes. Yeah, okay. That's correct.
So my question to you is, obviously we're not rural and we don't have any farming in our area, so that can make a big difference in the differences here. Do you not have any type of connection either through FIR or other sources to actually come up with a comparator similar to our size throughout the province of a municipality similar size, or do you have to use your own current clients, which doesn't really coincide with the type of municipality we are?
Yeah, and a very valid one, so thank you. We don't have to use only our clients.
Sorry,
the challenge that we have in doing hopefully the challenge we in accessing other municipal governments of similar size municipalities in comparison would be that we can have access to information that's already been reviewed in municipalities councils. And so the timing often doesn't work out in trying to get information from other municipalities of the same size to get a fairer apples to apples comparison.
Okay.
So municipalities of similar size to Orangeville, and their rates aren't approved by their council until July, August, September, whenever it might be. We can't have good comparisons for 2019 when we're presenting to your council. So that's the challenge there.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying
and try.
Sorry, Mr. Short. I guess what I was trying to find out was our outstanding taxes receivable. First of all, I want to thank the treasurer and her staff on some great collection efforts that those outstanding tax receivables seem to be holding or declining, which is good, but I just didn't know how we compared in a provincial average. I would assume that running around 6 or 7% of outstanding tax receivable is very good compared to other, and that's what I'm saying. If I look at that comparison being especially compared to a lot of rurals, it makes it look like we're really good. And I know we're good, but that's where I'm saying it would have been nice to have known what an actual provincial average would be. But that's good. Thank you to our staff.
Okay, okay, we've got Deputy Mayor McIntosh and then Councillor Andrews. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is on reserves. I believe I heard you say that we're doing a little better comparatively to other places our size. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you feel that our reserve level currently is adequate?
Mr. Short.
That's the hard question, unfortunately, and the reason for that, as I said, is that I am not an expert on the infrastructure needs of the municipality heading into, so I can comment on the status or compared to your tax base, compared to other metrics. What I can't effectively do, and I have an engineering background, is know what the infrastructure needs of the municipality will be going forward to be able to say that they're adequate from that. Would be a question for engineering consultants or your different managers in different departments on their infrastructure needs.
Madam Treasurer, do you want to weigh in on this?
That's the best I can do.
Thank you, Worship, for the opportunity. So through your Worship to our Deputy Mayor, I can very quickly address the question. During the 2020 budget deliberation, we did try to present the adequacy level of our reserves as well as our debt level, because you have to look at it both at the same time. So whether a reserve level is adequate is essentially based on our infrastructure needs. And as our auditor has indicated, it is, so our financial statements are a snapshot at a time. So the level of reserves that you're looking at is year ending December 31st, 2019. So whether that level is adequate for 2020, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, is heavily dependent on our infrastructure needs and our service delivery model moving forward. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor Andrews.
Well, thank you very much, Your Worship. I'd like to again comment and compliment Mr. Short and Ms. Syed and her team for the report. A lot of detail, and truly appreciated to go through all of the information. I'd like to zero in on a couple of things, one of which is to page number 6 of your report and the write-down of tangible capital assets. Can you give us an example of what that would be? And wouldn't that be something that would happen annually, or is it just something that, according to maybe your expertise, Mr. Short, that we don't have any write-downs in 2018, but 2019 we did? I look forward to your response to that question, and I do have a second.
So to the question, there's regular amortization, part of disposals of capital assets. If you were to sell a vehicle, for Mr. Mayor has alluded to as a possibility going forward, to those sales of different property. This one write-down was a particular adjustment to in your existing infrastructure.
Okay.
It's a non-cash, non-recurring write-down that wouldn't be a typical thing that we'd have every year.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And my second question is to the Treasurer. And as we have you presenting us with a variety of information during this COVID pandemic, post-COVID, we of course are anticipating much positive recovery, but you do make reference in this report, Ms. Syed, that the 2021 budget, there may be some challenges ahead. And I'm wondering if the 2020 receivables from a taxation point of view might be a part of that, or maybe could you just provide just a little more explanation to that comment that was found in the report?
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews. So if you may pose that question when we are presenting that report, I may be able to answer that. Right now, we're focusing on the financial statements. So I again respectfully ask you to pose that question when that report comes up.
I shall do, and I'll make note of that, and thank you for your request too as well. That's all I have, Your Worship. Thank you.
Very good. Any other councillors wish to ask any questions? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to the Treasurer. Upon approval of these financials, will you be using the 2019 actuals when you're doing the budget? I know I'd put forward a motion that was approved by Council that we'll be using 1 year of actuals in future budgets. So I'm just wondering, will you now, once we have approved this, be using the 2019 actuals for that purpose?
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, there was a bit of an echoing, so I think I got the gist of the question, so I will repeat it back to you just for confirmation. So are you asking me, pending approval of our audited financial statements, whether we would be using 2019 actual surplus information for the purpose of budgeting? If you don't mind repeating the question.
Councillor Sherwood?
Yeah, yes, Your Worship, through you to the Treasurer. What I was referring to, Madam Treasurer, is remember back in the approval of the budget, I had put forward a motion that rather than using budget versus budget, that we have at least 1 year of audited financials to compare. And I'm wondering now, when you're presenting the 2021 budget, for each item, each department, will you now be using, upon the approval of this financial, use this year as for our comparators? Does that make sense now?
Thank you again, through your worship to Councillor Sherwood. Yes, much clearer. I could hear the question clearly. Yes, yeah, you would be correct in that assumption.
Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Thank you, Councillor Post. Sorry, folks. Any further questions, councillors, before we have a motion to receive and approve this financial statement? No. Can I have a motion, please, to receive and approve?
Andrews.
Andrews, seconded by Sherwood. All in favor? Very good. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Short, and thank you, Madam Treasurer, for your report.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along on presentations, we have, is it Eliza or Elisa Gardner? Are you on board, Ms. Gardner? Okay, Ms. Gardner is not on board. Do we have Mr. Josh Leash on board?
Trying to rejoin right now. It's just emailed me saying he's trying to.
Okay.
I did. I think I as well.
All right. And do we have a representative of AC Cannabis Corp. Wishes to present tonight? No. Okay. That's three strikes. We're out.
Perhaps check back after.
All right. We will see if those folks want to join us, and we'll try and revisit this later. All right, moving on to item 10.1. This is a report from the CAO's department on Open Orangeville. Mr. Brennan, would you like to weigh in, sir?
Your Worship, if I may, the residents are online. They can hear us all. There's some sort of issue. I'm being texted as we're speaking. So I wonder if IT can look into that, but they're there. They can hear us. They just can't seem to get through.
Okay, that's fine. We're still looking into it, and we'll carry on. And when we get connected, we'll invite them in. Go ahead, Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, thank you. I just wanted to make a couple comments on the recovery plan and the report itself. I want to acknowledge the great work done by our staff on the recovery plan. It is a collective effort by our management team, supervisors, and of course input from all of staff. There are hundreds of documents that form this recovery plan. They are all rolled up to provide a high-level overview of the actions that have been taken and the actions that will be taken as we work our way through this recovery. I would also like to acknowledge the work done by our Economic Development and Culture Division and that by our Communications Division in the work of putting this together. There was a lot of work. I would also like to provide a special thank you to Andrea McKinney, our General Manager of Corporate Services. She took the lead on this project and provided excellent oversight and ongoing support and guidance to staff throughout. So, Your Worship, I would like to pass it over to Andrea to answer any of your questions or to give a high-level overview of the report and the plan itself, and again, to answer any questions from members of council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Yeah, we're in unprecedented times here, and it's very comforting to know that our staff is able to roll with the punches and come up with a recovery plan like this. So thank you to everybody involved, as Mr. Brennan had said. Ms. McKinney, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ed, for the introduction. So the plan's been laid out in a way that is intended to capture the response that initially took place and the actions over the past 4 months, as well as the go-forward approach that Mr. Brennan just spoke about. We've taken an approach where we've effectively launched a document that has a community lens and a business lens that we're hoping is easy to read on both sides, web pages or a takeaway document if you want to read it end to end. It has live links to real-time information about what you can expect as services reopen, safety measures, and the status of the various pieces as we move through the recovery phase. As an example, stage 3 being announced by the province today means we'll be reacting to that with a goal to get some things done for Friday, but continuing to work with public health along the way. But additionally, we hope that the document is found to be easy to read and understand, and that it also reflects not just the actions that were taken by the town, but the way that the community came together and the spirit that people showed, thanking the healthcare workers, working with each other, and we're hoping that people will continue to distance socially while shopping locally. So we encourage everyone to do that. Thank you for the opportunity, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, councillors, any questions on this report? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I just wanted to actually compliment staff on this well-documented report that we put forward here. And boy, you can sure see the efforts and lots of work that had to take place during these last few months for staff and all our facilities. So again, thank you, Andrea and your team. Phenomenal job and well-documented. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you're muted still.
Councillor Andrews, go right ahead, sir.
Great, thank you very much, Your Worship, and like many of us on the council, we appreciate when staff provide us with incredibly detailed information that help us, but you are helping our community, Ms. McKinney and your team and everyone else involved with this. It is, you know, uncharted territory, but you really have taken the bull by the horns and have really guided where we're going to hopefully end up. I guess based on what was announced by the Premier, we're moving into phase 3, and you made reference very quickly that, you know, there's certain things that may have to be looked at. Can you share some of that, or would that be premature?
I think we can share it through you, Your Worship, though. I'm going to defer to Ray because I don't want to speak on his behalf. A lot of the impacts today have been in the community services area.
Mr. Osborne.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Andrea. Quickly, I guess you're absolutely correct, Councillor. The phase 3 has really triggered a lot of things in recreation, the community services side. One of the things that we're quite excited about, and of course, our young kids in the community are excited about, is the playgrounds. And the playgrounds we're working on now, we're doing all the final inspections on playgrounds to re-inspect to ensure these playgrounds are ready to go. They've been sitting idle now for a number of months. And they're all fenced up, of course, and we're working diligently to have those activated by the 17th, which is the date that we can. And we're doing that. And we're also looking and actually working with the public health guys now to determine making sure we have proper signage up and making sure that we have all the rules in place. Likewise, in our buildings, as you know, the numbers have increased. We can have 50 internally now, and we're taking a look again with public health and how exactly that applies. So we just got that information today, and it'll take a couple of days working with public health people to make sure we have all the detail in place to activate certain spaces in buildings. So we're working on that as well.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Andrews, you wish to ask a question or comment?
No, I've already done so.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions from councillors, we need a motion to receive this report. Madam Clerk, are we receiving? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Post. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Post.
No, I was just going to give the motion to receive. Yep.
We have 10.1 and 10.11. Are we receiving both of those reports? Okay.
Do both.
We'll do both. So may I have a motion to receive 10.1 and 10.11? Councillor Post, and seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you. That's passed unanimously. 10.2, managing the.
Mayor, we do have people on the line now.
Okay. Very good. So we've resolved our technical difficulties here. We're going to reverse field and go back to, is it Ms. Gardner online? Or
yes.
Mr. I see Ms. Gardner, you're there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Very good. We can. Go right ahead, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. Good evening. My name is Elisa Gardner, and I live on Hutchison Court. Last year, I came in front of Council with the issue of the overgrown weeds along the pathway in my neighborhood. This item remains a concern for myself, my neighbors, and my community. And we noticed this season, it's the same issue. I totally support naturalizing certain areas. However, there are appropriate locations, and this just isn't one of them. But a less busier area would be great. It's important to remember how many adults, children, and pets walk this area. Just yesterday, a lady was complaining as her dog went into the uncut area and came out covered in burrs. Please keep in mind that there's people that live here with small children and pets and want to be able to enjoy the path. This is still an issue, and we're looking for a solution. I am here representing myself, my neighborhood, my community, and I look forward to hearing what Council has to say. Thank you again for letting me speak in front of you.
Okay, Ms. Gardner, thank you very much. Second item here, 9.4, Mr. Leach. I see Mr. Leach is on board as well. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to join tonight. I actually didn't have a big speech, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to be present when we get to item number 11.1, which is our request, the Orangeville Blues and Jazz Festival organization request for us to use the community grant that we received this year to help continue to fund our organization through these tough times and allow us the ability to get back to the planning table and get ready for the 2021 season. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Leach, if you could please hang on for us. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you at that time. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, let's get back to our agenda. We have 10.2, managing the financial impact of COVID-19. Madam Treasurer, are you going to speak to this matter?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Council. The report is fairly self-explanatory. I just wanted to highlight a couple of items. The first one is the town's financial resiliency in terms of the next quarter, July through September. So we are closely monitoring our cash flow, and projection of town's cash flow as of writing this report through to the end of September indicate that the town is in a good positive position to manage our expenses. The other thing I would like to highlight today from my report is the MFOA's report that was published a couple of weeks ago. It was sort of addressing the provincial and the federal government in regards to providing financial incentive to municipal partners. So one of the grants that MFOA is asking the provincial government to establish is to support municipalities for targeted net revenue loss, mainly in transit and recreation. So those are the two areas I think it's worthwhile to highlight. And also I kind of finished my report by addressing that 2020 is a different year. Therefore, our timeline and budget preparation for 2021 will look very different. And I will be bringing in a report in early fall of this year, of course, in consultation with our senior leadership team, which would lay out some of our strategy and timeline going forward in relation to 2021 budget. At this point, I will take any question from Council.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Councillor Peters, go right ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Treasurer. Would you mind elaborating on the timeline for the budget? I understand there's a lot going on and there's a lot of uncertainty, but as much as possible, going through that budget exercise earlier rather than later is preferable. And, you know, previous council made a good move getting that exercise into the latter part of the previous year. So can you speak about when you see that occurring and if at all possible, how early we might be able to have those conversations?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Peters. So one of the things I have in my report, Councillor, is that in talking to some of our industry colleagues, the general consensus, or the general wisdom, I should say, is to wait and see how some of the financial implications play out. More specifically, people are looking toward the provincial budget, and like I said, MFOA has recently written a white paper asking the provincial as well as the federal government to provide financial incentive to municipalities throughout Ontario. So I think it would be wise for us to see how some of these information trickle down to us. Like I said, at this point in time, I am in consultation with senior leadership. So my hope and aim is to bring a more detailed report back to you in the beginning of fall.
Very good. Get a follow-up, Councillor Peters?
Yeah, if you don't mind, thanks. I guess we would be discussing the budget in the fall. So to discuss when we're going to discuss the budget in the fall seems like we could be well into next year, which means we're operating without guidance. We're spending money we haven't allocated formally as a council. So again, there's no motion here about when the budget is going to happen, but the uncertainty we have now is likely to be some degree of uncertain, maybe more, maybe less in the new year. And while I can understand, trying to get more information from the province and the federal government, I would really encourage us to be having those discussions as much as possible in 2019 as we can. And I do look forward to more information from you, but I really don't want to see this go into March and April of 2020, because I think that's a bit irresponsible of us.
You're behind, Councillor Peters.
Sorry, did I say? Oh.
We got what you meant.
Yes.
Your Worship, if I may address one more point. So through Your Worship to Councillor Peters. So one of the other things, and I haven't said this in my report, so the province, and in fact, province is in discussion with municipal partners. So I think one of the things that will come out, and I'm not 100% sure about that, but one of the things that I'm hearing will come out is the province may open up municipalities to run a deficit budget for the next 2 years. So for us to run a budget or to balance a budget, without understanding what the province's intention is, we are guided and regulated by the Municipal Act. So, like I said, in talking to some of our industry partners, the general consensus and wisdom is that we should wait at least for a few months and to see how A, the financial implication of COVID-19 play out, and B, if there are other legislative changes that are happening in relation to municipal budget and Municipal Act. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Let me see if I'm on. Yes, Your Worship, through you to the Treasurer. You've noted in your report that MPAC will not be going into the next reassessment. And so, in other words, you're going to be using for our 2021 what was returned in the roll 2020. I'm also very concerned, has MPAC been able to keep up with assessing new growth? And on the opposite, we probably have a lot of assessment at risk that is to go before the Assessment Review Board. And has the Assessment Review Board resumed? Because those reduced assessments are really going to affect that assessment base. I would think that you'd be quite concerned as to what our return roll is going to look like this year.
Madam Clerk.
No, Treasurer.
Madam Treasurer, I'm sorry.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, absolutely valid point, and that's one of the things I've alluded, and one of the reasons I think we should take a little bit of time to assess the overall situation around our 2021 budget is precisely that. The province has now directed MPAC not to reassess in 2021. As Council is aware, every 4 years we go through the reassessment process. So what I know as of today, our new growth is still being assessed, and ARB has been holding virtual meetings like this. But what our year-end role will look like, I still don't know that. So for us to make a good judgment call in terms of how this is going to impact us financially, because at the end of the day, our assessment base is one of the leading variables of balancing our budget. So without the additional revenue coming through reassessment, this is something we really have to closely inspect.
Very good. Any other questions from councillors? Seeing none, can we have a motion, please, to receive the report CPSTF? I'm sorry, Madam Treasurer.
Your Worship, I believe there was a question from Councillor Andrews during the presentation of the financial statements.
Okay, Councillor Andrews.
If you'd like me to repeat it, Ms. Syed, I'd be happy to do so. And again, making reference to the 2020 tax receivables, your comment in the document highlighted that there will be some challenges forthcoming. And I know that Councillor Sherwood has referenced this not only today, but in previous meetings as well, because of her taxation expertise. But the point is that just wanting to see from your crystal ball, where do you envision the challenges, if you're able to provide us that information post-COVID, of course.
Thank you, Worship. So through your Worship to Councillor Andrews. So what the crystal ball is saying is that this is still up in the air, and we still have to see how the whole, implication of COVID-19 unfolds. In terms to your question regarding taxes receivable, just so you understand that taxes receivable is a balance sheet item, whereas our budget, which is cash basis, we mainly focus on revenue and expense related lines. So whether taxes receivable up and down would have an impact on our budgetary process per se, no. However, that being said, if your receivables are coming down, that means your collection has gone up, and clearly that will have a positive impact on cash flow. And one of the things that we've learned during COVID-19 is having a positive cash flow is always very welcoming.
Great. Well,
so
thank you very much.
Good.
I like what I hear. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, so let's move on then to the recommendation that this report be received. May I have a motion to receive the report?
Andrews.
Councillor Taylor, and seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Very good. That was passed unanimously as well. 10.3, Community Improvement Plan. This is a recommendation that report CMS-EDC 2020 be received, and that council direct staff to include $100,000 for the completion of a community improvement plan in the 2021 capital budget proposal for council's consideration. Did any staff member want to speak to this? Mr. Brennan, did you want to speak to this at all?
Your Worship, I will just make a quick comment, and then maybe Mr. Osmond may want to speak to it. But I just want to state that a community improvement plan is a great way for council to recognize through the Planning Act and stuff methods to help our community to improve. I apologize. So it is a tool that is made affordable to municipalities in order to get programs, community improvement type programs into our plan, and to exercise some spending of money on such programs. Not sure if Mr. Osmond has anything to say, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. I'm joined this evening by our Manager of Economic Development and Culture, and she's spent a lot of time dealing with this report and dealing with the CIP. It is an exciting venture, and it's something that is 30 years old at this point, and it's something that includes a whole bunch of things going forward. So I'd like for ask Ruth Phillips if you speak now at this point. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Through you, your worship, to all of council. As Ray mentioned, our only CIP was completed 30 years ago, and at that time it focused primarily on the downtown core. Most of the items, almost all of the items within that 1990 plan have now been fulfilled. And a lot of the actions that were taken at that time were done in perpetuity. So we can't really take that plan too much further. Building on the official plan review that has been going on, completion of a community improvement plan in 2021 would position our community well by supporting our COVID recovery efforts and encouraging private investment in targeted areas of the community, especially considering some of the future projects that may be under consideration. The intention of this report was really to bring the CIP project idea forward to council's attention for their consideration as you look forward to deliberating the 2021 budget. As you know, existing conditions of the Municipal Act restrict municipalities from giving bonuses or incenting commercial or industrial enterprises. However, Section 28 of the Planning Act outlines a number of tools that can be used for community improvement where approved CIPs exist. So the completion of a new community improvement plan might support our capacity to complete some future projects.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. We have some councillors wish to ask questions. Councillor Peters, followed by Councillor Sherwood. Councillor Peters, go right ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. Phillips, could you expand on the types of projects that might be included? You know, we've only been here half a term. We've already seen a cycling and trails master plan, a SNAP. We're working on a heritage plan, or sorry, a tourism plan. The official plan's under review. Can you be more specific of what this would cover that those plans do not?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Peters, from my perspective, and our director or our planning manager may have additional comments to make, but from my perspective in economic development, the completion of that plan enables the municipality to work with private enterprise and incent private sector investment in projects that we carry out. So we are completing a tourism strategy. There may be some infrastructure projects that are recommended as a result of that tourism strategy. I don't know what those would be at this point, but that could be coming forward. We do know that the municipality is also looking at adaptive reuse of some town-owned land, the parking lot across from Town Hall at 82 to 90 Broadway. I don't know that there would be private investment in that. We're waiting for that consultant's report to come forward with recommendations. But that's another example of an infrastructure project that potentially could benefit from private sector investment. The Facade Improvement Program in the downtown core is an excellent example of a public-private partnership that worked very successfully, leveraging by investing ourselves. We were able to leverage investment by the private sector and beautify the downtown core. The problem with that project, as it was written in 1990, is that building owners could only take advantage of it one time. So a lot of them 30 years later have additional facades that could be improved. There are recommendations within the Roger Brooks report, for example, that if we were able to expand that program, perhaps we could introduce an upper level facade improvement that would enable us to move offices, professional services to the upper levels and open additional retail space in the downtown on the lower levels. Our industrial park is another area that could benefit greatly from an incentive program. Many of especially the industrial plazas, have outdated facilities. They have 16-foot ceilings. The loading docks are not conducive to today's manufacturers. So there may be programs that could then come forward to incent our industrial building owners to improve and maximize their space.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Ms. Phillips. Thank you very much for bringing up about the facade. It is very much outdated, and I hadn't realized that it was going back to the original CIP. Now, previously the CIP was just for downtown, and you're asking now for it to be expanded. Is that how I'm understanding that?
I think, and it may be too early to talk about the various areas, but from my perspective, Councillor Sherwood, if we're going to introduce a new community improvement plan, there are multiple areas that could benefit from that. The official plan defines the residential, commercial, and industrial areas that could be part of a community improvement project area. Sometimes they address the entire community, and other times they're very defined areas. Two areas that I know are defined within our within our official plan right now is the downtown as well as the industrial zone, and I think both of those areas would benefit from a revitalized plan that expanded our capacity to work with private sector for incentives.
So upon approval of this would also make you readdress the facade and look at some of the anomalies that currently fall within that facade program, correct? That's correct. Just another comment. An example of the community improvement funds, would that be the blade signs that BIA are going forward with? Would that be accessible for the downtown I'm trying to make I don't know if I'm making sense.
Through you, Your Worship, I understand what you're asking. Would it enable us to introduce blade programs where we could incent or provide some, not a grant, but some financial support? I believe it would. I'm not sure if Brandon Ward is on the line and would like to add any comments to that, but that's exactly the type of program that enables the municipality to work with private sector.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Ward on board? No, it's on vacation maybe. Okay, Councillor Taylor, you wish to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I actually have 4, so feel free to cut me off and give the floor to somebody else. If not, I'll go. But so the facade program, thank you, Ms. Phillips. I thought that was an excellent program. And I'm just curious, I see that it's running out, but the reality is not all of the businesses took advantage of that program. You know, and I don't want to call anybody out. I'd love it if they all did. A recent example of an improvement that was done on Broadway and downtown is Carter's, and I applaud Carter's for the work they did. I think it adds to our town, and it's certainly a very vocal or a very central point. Is there any way to roll that out still with those businesses that haven't? Could we circle back at all? That'd be question one.
Would you like me to answer that now, Your
Yes,
Worship?
please.
Sure.
Through Your Worship to Councillor Taylor, as it exists right now, the Facade Improvement Program, a property owner can get matching funds of up to $10,000 once ever. So if a facade improvement or a facade improvement has been completed and they didn't spend the total amount approved for matching, then they could come back and do a second one. So I believe the full amount is $10,000 from the municipality. So if they spent $7,000, they could come back again a second time for $3,000. But once their maximum had been allotted, then that was the end of it.
Your Worship.
Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Phillips. Is it possible at all for the town to circle back with those businesses that have not, and to let them know again that they're eligible to be in this program and they can pursue it?
Certainly.
Okay. Your Worship, may I continue?
Go ahead.
I feel like this is a Councillor Sherwood question, but I just want to make sure I've got the ask. I've read the document, and what we're saying here is we would like Council to take under consideration having this as part of the budget process. We're actually not voting on doing anything here today other than talking about voting on something in the future. That's what the ask is, correct?
Correct.
Okay. May I continue then?
Number 4, one more.
Number 3, actually.
We'll move on. Okay.
Number 3, you mentioned the commercial areas, and I do think that's an interesting spot to go. As I travel throughout southwestern Ontario and see some of the other industrial parks, some of those commercial areas have beautiful landscaping that's done in front of their buildings. And, you know, candidly, some of ours are quite well done, and others, you know, could probably use some mentoring from someone that maybe has some skill sets, and we could place some importance on it. But I think that would be a great benefit to the town if that could be the consideration. And maybe, Your Worship, if I could, just one more, and that is perhaps it also could be extended to main arteries. And 2 examples of main arteries that I travel on frequently. Sea line, and certainly no offense to any of the residents, but some of those fences are falling down and they're different, and they just don't quite look like it's a gateway to a neighborhood. I'm wondering if there's potential to invest in that to beautify. And another example would be Riddell. Riddell has, as you approach Broadway, large amounts of green space that we really haven't done a lot with. And I'm wondering if that might fall into it as well, if it's all a beautification program. So just as thoughts.
Right. There also are some businesses on Riddell that could do a little better in presenting their frontages to that main artery as well. Okay, Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Through Your Worship, I just wanted to speak to respond to a comment that my fellow Councillor Taylor had mentioned, getting back to the facade and letting the businesses know, or the property owners know, that the facade is available. As a member on the BIA board management with a little under 300 people represented in that area, we do send out communications, but you just have to remember that a lot of these small town businesses, they need to have the funds to match the funds. So sometimes doing facades can be quite an expense to their business. And unfortunately, in most cases where we've seen some of them come forward, the cost for doing those, and I'll take Carter's as an example, was far in excess of the 10 plus 10 match, of far excess of 20,000. So we are communicating, just so you know, Councillor, but I think it's a cost, it's the expense of business.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to sort of make my thoughts known before we go through the motion process. I'm fully in support of getting that facade program updated, and hopefully that's something that can be amended on the existing CIP regardless of whether this goes through. And I do appreciate that we're not voting on its actual pursuit, just its inclusion in the budget. But I feel with the number of plans we have and the way the budget's going to look in this following year, that it's just not the time to invest those kinds of funds. And I think we need to work on implementing the plans we've already invested in before we pile, plans upon plans upon plans.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor. Okay, so with that being said, I don't see any other councillors wishing to speak. We need a motion to receive and direct staff to include the $100,000 in the capital budget proposal for council's consideration. Councillor Sherwood making that motion, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Peters is in opposition. Thank you, councillors. Moving on to 10.4, Business and Economic Development Advisory Committee Terms of Reference. Ms. Phillips, did you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if Councillor Andros would like to speak to this or not. Certainly from a staff perspective, our BDAC committee was able to reconvene in June. And as we move forward with the opening of businesses in our new environment, our goal in adapting the BDAC terms of reference was to more fully engage our membership as opposed to launching another committee as a recovery task force. We hope to utilize our BDAC expertise and network of contacts to complete a more detailed and ongoing business impact assessment exercise, and we'll be utilizing our members to help us identify immediate and longer term challenges, anticipated labor force trends that they might be experiencing, and to help us to develop strategies that we can implement to support our employers in both the short and long term.
Very good. Councillor Andrews, did you wish to add anything?
I would, and thank you very much, Your Worship, and also thank you, Ms. Phillips. Ms. Phillips, I recall our conversation on March the 16th. This was, of course, the early days of the onset of COVID-19 and the potential impact. I mean, I remember you and I having this conversation where I was really concerned about the fact that, as we know, the reality, it turned out to be quite significant. And I felt that, the expertise that was at the table of BDAC, might be able to provide some assistance. And through the assistance of the clerk also, it was necessary to provide a modification to the terms of reference to include this. And again, I'd like to thank Ms. Phillips for her communication with the clerk, and also Ms. McKinney as well for making reference to the fact that, the opportunity for the recovery could include, members of BDAC and also, most importantly, the Economic Development Office. So just to summarize, I feel that the modification of the terms of reference and access to the expertise that exists on BDAC will be certainly beneficial and helpful to the members of the business community during the post-COVID recovery.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any questions from councillors on this item, 10.4? Okay, may we have a motion to receive this report? Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Pardon me? And to revise, and that the revised terms of reference be effective July 2020 until the end of the council term of 2022. All those in favor? Opposed? That item is passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, moving on to 10.5. This is item on naturalization of park spaces. Recommendation that this report be received, and that and the report suggests recommends that the council continue to follow current policies and plans as they relate to naturalized spaces and allow the park space to remain naturalized. Any councillors wish to comment on this? Okay. To read both of them?
They both came from Todd with respect to that. So. Okay.
So I have a couple of pieces of correspondence here that have come in on this matter. I'm going to read them and then we'll ask if there's any councillors wish to comment. This is from Rob Mayer. I'm unable to attend the meeting today as I have to work. Please pass on my note to council. I live at 61 Drew Brown Boulevard, walking my children and pets along the main road of Parkinson and the pathways. The grass is routinely knee-high in some parts, mainly weeds. It looks terrible and unsightly. It's not fair to the residents of the area to pay such high property taxes and not to have these maintained even bi-weekly. I pay close to $7,500 a year in property taxes for a subdivision home. That's insanely high. I think Orangeville is one of the highest in the GTA. It's simply unacceptable. Thanks for your continued support for the community. Thanks, Rob Mayer. Second item is from, I'm just trying to figure this one out here.
Go to the second page.
It's like Melanie Myers. So it's important for council to know that this was not the agreement that we signed when we purchased our house. We in no way were aware that this would be the case because our lot was not included in the lots that would not be maintained. Last year, they're doing it for everyone else and not us, although I noticed they are now not doing it for others, and which is not okay either. You cannot just keep changing things without informing residents or letting us have a say in it. Council members do not live here. They do not have to deal with the issues we're having, so I am not okay with them speaking so lightly on it. We all pay extremely high taxes, that is a well-known fact, and therefore asking that one patch of weeds gets cleaned up and maintained is not a big ask. Last year, we were the only ones not maintained. This situation is not so much about how it looks, but how it's affecting our ability to safely use our backyard with our children. There are noxious weeds back there, which is a pylon fence, and should be able to hold the town responsible for cleaning it up. Also, last time it was cut, I watched two, not just one, large lawn mowing tractors go down each side of the path. It would take no extra time to cut out a small little green space with one tractor while the other does the rest of the path. So it's not about needing any extra costs. They try to say to do one for all, well, the other does the rest of the path. This is not about needing any extra costs.
What area is it referring to, Your Worship?
I'm sorry?
What area is it referring to?
I don't know. I think it's, oh, Hutchison. This is Hutchison again. I just don't understand why this is so hard to have done. If the town cannot manage taking on new subdivisions, then the town should stop allowing development. Please see below for how this has affected us with our health and safety and financially. I understand in other areas that back on conservation, large fields or massive lands where trails go through, we are talking about a very small patch of green space between homes. If you could use the pictures I sent where I show this small space so that council can make an educated decision instead of the uneducated responses at last summer's meeting, I would appreciate it. Here's what I wrote on the Facebook page. My husband has never had allergies, has been suffering really bad now for a few years because of this. We also have an infestation of funnel spiders, mice, moles, as well as noxious weeds growing in our yard that we can't just get control of even by paying someone to take care of our lawn. It's so frustrating to deal with in a subdivision home, and my kids can't play in the backyard without being bit by a spider. Wade was bit last year on antibiotics for 2 weeks. They're stepping on thistles and Terry and I cannot enjoy our yard without suffering from allergies, but steadily getting worse each year as they let weeds grow. If this was a resident's yard, the town will be telling us we have to clean it up. So why are we allowed to leave it this way? Burrs, ragweed, thistles of many different kinds are not appropriate, especially if the yard was given to us homeowners who would have taken care of it. If the kids lose a ball over the fence, they will never be able to get it back. You cannot go in there without being bit by a spider, a mouse, a tick, or coming out covered in burrs. Thanks, Todd. I really wish I could be there, but I know you have our best interest in mind. Melanie Myers, 13 Hutchison Court. Okay, any councillors wish to speak on this matter? Councillor Taylor.
Yes, Your Worship. Through you, if I may, to Mr. Osmond. I did send an email to Mr. Osmond today on this matter and copied council. I just want the public to hear the question and the answer. And that is, in here, I think all of us are very tax conscious and tax aware. And when you read the document on page 4, which is 158 in the document that we're all looking at tonight, it talks about the dedicated truck and trailer, the walk behind mower, the gas powered trimmer, and the costs that are associated with that. And, you know, I essentially asked Mr. Osmond if there was a way around these costs, and Mr. Osmond gave a response. And I'm just wondering for the public and just affirmation for council, if they maybe didn't have a chance to read those exchanges today, if Mr. Osmond, you could speak to that. and some other options we could pursue as opposed to having these costs.
Mr. Husband.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Taylor and Council. First of all, the question response is two-sided. The response in terms of the cost to do the work on this particular area is one that's is really directed to council, because if it's a decision to go in and change the area, that means to cut out the naturalized area, we will be given direction to use different types of equipment to cut the area out, which is going to include removal of stumps and heavy brush and so on and so forth. And all of our equipment that we have, for the most part, is equipment that's used on sports fields, manicured grass areas, level spaces, and that kind of thing. So yes, if we had to go in and we were directed to go in and change that area, we would actually do two things. One is we'd take a look at what would work for us in the long term and what would work for us in the short term. If a short-term decision were made to do something right now, yeah, we could conceivably rent a piece of equipment that could go in and really cut things down quickly. We could also use, in some cases, we have to use manual labor, got to use manual labor. And we have to use some chainsaws, that kind of thing, depending on the size of the vegetation in the area. Then we would actually, once we get it down, get the roots out, and get all the ground leveled, then we can start using our own equipment that's designed for more finished, if you would, grassed areas. So it really depends on the outcome of the decision this evening. If you go in and make a decision to cut down a naturalized area, it's different than going in to cut down a ball field or a grass area that's in an open grass space or a streetscape, or whatever the case would be. In this case, we have an area, in this particular case here, behind Hutchison Street, that really is on a walkway. Our mandate now and our operations now is to cut that walkway back 1 meter on both sides of the trail, and that's where we stop. If we go into the area that's been naturalized, it changes everything we do in terms of where we do the operation. And it definitely takes different equipment to do that, given that that area now is matured to a point where we'd have to do a lot of removal. So that's the difference in deciding if it's a short-term decision, something we have to deal with this year. We would not have the equipment in stock. We would have in inventory. We would have probably go and rent it at this point and come up with a cost of rent, and that would make a quick fix, if you would. And then we would look at a long-term. You probably see something in the budget in 2021 that will deal with some long-term equipment to maintain these areas over long term.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just my comments on this issue. I have no interest in cutting down the naturalized areas. They were put there for a reason. They have a place in this town. It's also a slippery slope. If we look at this area, then we have to look at all the areas where we have supposed encroachments of natural species onto what's being referred to as subdivision lots, which I assume just means grass. And eventually this town will be nothing but asphalt and grass, and that's not the Orangeville I want to live in. The landscaped areas are there for a reason. They're diverse, and they serve not just the people, but the rest of nature. And I think it's really important in an urban center to have that diversity. So I'd like to make the motion as written.
Very good. I also wanted to comment, Councillor Sherwood and I spent some time on Sunday driving around to each one of these areas. I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, because the areas off Hunter, behind Chapman, we went to the Hutchinson Court area, the area behind Edenwood. Councillor Peters will remember that's where we planted a number of trees with CDC last year. I think the naturalized area complements the fact that the town has been made a bee city, and we're concerned with pollinators. Yeah, I'm in support of the motion or the recommendation as it stands. Councillor Sherwood, do you wish to speak to this?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you. You had made mention that we walked it. We did walk it in the rain on all 8 sites that were mentioned in the report. And I can tell you, as I walked those, I found the whole areas safe except one little space. Beautiful. The sounds of nature were beautiful. The wildflowers were beautiful. The cuts that the town is currently doing, I think, was adequate. And in some cases, we noticed even a little bit more than, just the 1 meter on the side. We did notice a couple of little spots that had a little bit more. The only one spot that I really I can see, was coming off of Hutchison Court, that there was like a little triangle part that goes to join onto that walkway. That would be the only one if we didn't have to go to an extra expense of equipment or hiring of staff, that I would probably be in a line with it. And I don't know if you know exactly where I'm referring to, but you come off of Hutchison and there's just a very short little walkway to get the walkway that goes along behind to Wardlaw. But in actual fact, I was completely impressed with it, and I think that it needs to stay the way it is on the 8, other than that one little area. So Mr. Osmond, if they were to go forward with that little area, would that require extra equipment and extra staff?
Mr. Osmond.
Your worship, through to Councillor Sherwood, I would have staff take a look at the area. If you're looking at a triangle land that, as Councillor Peters alluded to, is a grass area, then it'd be a little different than getting into an area that's got tall grasses and different vegetation species that's designed for naturalization in the long term. So there may be something we can do in terms of a little different sweep or something like that, if you would, using some of your equipment to do that. So we'd have to take a look at that and isolate the situation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wish I had made note of the house numbers. I seem to think it might have been around house number 42 or 39 or something like that, where there's that little triangle before it joins on. And I would just thought if we did cut that, that would be the only one I'd be in favor, but not in the rest of the report.
Okay. Any further discussion? Councillor Taylor.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Maybe one more through you, one more question to Mr. Osmond, and then a comment, if I may, Your Worship. So, Mr. Osmond, if this motion tonight is going to go the way the report is written by your group, that would be fine. I mean, the residents would have to figure that out. What if the residents simply banded together and cut it on their own if council didn't support? And those financial resources were taken care of on their own, and then town staff looked after them. Because it feels like it's the initial piece that town staff is concerned about, not the latter, the maintaining.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm not sure if there's a question there. If it's right now, I mean, we can't have the public going into public space and starting to cut properties outside of their own private property.
That's my question.
These are maintained by public staff or by operations staff, in this case, park staff. And if they were to trespass into the public space and start cutting the area, then they'll be in violation of the public bylaw.
Yes, Your Worship, may I?
One more. Yep, go ahead, sir.
Through you, Your Worship, Mr. Osmond, I'm not suggesting that people would trespass, and I certainly want citizens to be law and abiding. That's not where I was going at all. It would be something that I would suggest that the town would work with staff, the citizens would work with staff, but the citizens could do the work with the permission of the town and remove that debris, and then have town staff look after it. But I wouldn't, to be clear, and the residents are listening, please don't go in there and cut down unless we have permission of the town. That's not what I'm advocating for.
Well, there would be insurance and liability issues there, Councillor Taylor. I think we really can't have our residents taking things onto their own.
Mr. Osmond, please, Your Worship?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, first of all, Councillor Taylor, yes, absolutely correct. If in a lot of areas in town right now, we do partner with the residents in the area to do cleanups, to do maintenance on areas that they can help us with under our guidance and supervision. We do cleanups now, as an example, partner with CBC, with larger groups in particular areas of town. The particular area that you were talking about is in actual fact designed, help came from CBC. The species in the area was identified by CBC. We planted what was basically in the development plan based on CBC input. So that's the product of what we have today. I've had staff go in there the last couple of days, take a look at it and see if there's any debris in there in terms of garbage and things that are flying into the area. And that's something that we can get into and clean up. One of the problems, as has been alluded to by one of the residents, is that going into these areas, some people just don't go into these types of areas because they are naturalized areas, and you could do damage, or you could injure yourself by dealing with some of these plants. I should clarify that there's no noxious plants in our inventory in open spaces, and if something were to grow in the area and we identify it, we remove it. In this case, we don't have that kind of situation. But if there's something, if in the neighborhood, as an example, the neighbor wanted to get together and help us do some cleanup and do some things in the area, we would welcome the neighbor input into our maintenance program.
So through your worship, Mr. Osmond, what would next steps be like that for the neighborhood so that I could help facilitate that if this vote is going against the wishes of the neighbors? What would we do? What would next steps be? Is it facilitate a meeting with yourself, or?
Yes, we could do that. We could facilitate a meeting with the community services and the parks manager of facilities and parks and the supervisor of parks, and we could see exactly what's going on in the area, and if there's something they might want to help with, then we welcome that. That withstanding, we have several policies that we're working underneath. The canopy policy, the naturalization policy, and so on. So all these policies are in place. So any maintenance we do has been done very carefully, and we would do it under direction of staff and with the input of the expertise, in some cases CBC.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond.
Okay, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Osmond. If I go back specifically to the area of Hutchison Court where I'm talking about the little triangle, I don't know if it's the appetite of council to have you come back and see what a cost would be to do that. Just that one little section and exclude all the other areas. Because like I said, that was the only area when I walked, and I was walking in the rain, that I would probably favor, but I just didn't know if what the appetite of the council is for that length. But my other concern is that is mentioned in a legal document that is registered with the registry office under a subdivision agreement. We then, if we start cutting that, have to revisit that subdivision agreement, and does that not come to a legal expense as well?
Mr. Osmond or Mr. Brennan?
Your Worship, I will let Mr. Osmond answer, but I would like to have a comment after, if you would, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Osmond.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we would be definitely in breach of that contract, and we had to comply with our contract. And that development agreement that was put in place and that subdivision was developed, we signed off on. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that was done under the input and under the auspices of the CBC, and they reviewed everything going into that neighborhood, and they would give us the guidelines by which to plant, and that's what we did. So if we were to change what we've done in the past now, then we would be opening up that contract, and we would be looking at the potential liability.
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, I just want to make a comment on the previous question by Councillor Taylor. To be understood and be clear, if Council approves this report as it is with regards to naturalization and leaving it as is, staff would not work with residents to cut or clear these places. It would be left naturalizing. I think what Mr. Osmond was saying, if there's a pickup of litter and things of that nature, we certainly would work with our residents. If there's a complaint of a noxious weed or something like that, but staff would not, if council supports this and wants to maintain the naturalized areas, they would not work with residents to cut these areas, regardless of the cost to the town or to the residents.
Okay, one more, Mr. Taylor, go ahead.
Your Worship, I have a question, and then I'd like to make a comment, if I could, please, as well.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Councillor Sherwood has mentioned an interesting point. When you read through what the complaints of the neighborhood is, it's Hutchison. That's the issue. And if I understood what Councillor Sherwood said, she's recognizing that it potentially is an issue as well. So I wonder if there's an opportunity to decouple this and we simply talk about behind Hutchison and we leave the rest, because that's what the issue is.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor at this moment. Sorry, I seconded it. Yeah. So I think what we need to do here is vote on the motion, and if it's defeated, then we go to a second option. So
You're on mute.
Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'd just like to make a few comments on that section. So I think one of the residents who spoke made a very articulate point, and that is, if that was a residential property, we would be in there with bylaw and we would be giving these people a bill for maintaining the property. And I think Councillor Sherwood's comments again were quite apropos. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and the residents that are there that have to stare out on a regular basis, and myself included, don't think this looks very nice, and really firmly believe that it should be cut. And in such a personal way, with your properties abutting it, none of us live in that area. I think it would be prudent to follow the advice of the residents and vote to support them.
Okay, thank you for your comment. We have a motion on the floor right now. All those in favor?
Can you recite the motion?
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat the motion?
The motion is to accept the report and the council continue to follow the current policies and plans as they relate to naturalized spaces and allow the park space to remain naturalized, which is the recommendation of staff. We'll call the vote again. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Taylor is opposed. That motion passes. Okay, moving on to, I'm sorry, Councillor Taylor?
I thought we would have a second chance here at this second motion then. Didn't we talk about that?
There is no second motion now. If that was defeated, we would have talked about amending it, but we move on now to the next item. Oh, I'm sorry. A recess has been called. All right, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess, folks.
Me too.
we're back. We're going to continue on with our agenda. Moving on to 10.6, which is an item regarding a residential demolition permit application, and the town staff has recommended approval of this building permit and demolition permit. Mr. Jones, did you want to speak to this at all, or?
Sorry, Your Worship, I was on mute.
Now you're on mute again.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. Got a bit of a delay. The report is generally self-explanatory. This is a property that's currently boarded up as a dilapidated property. The owner of the property is looking to demolish it and reconstruct a home on that property. It's a fairly straightforward application.
Very good. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Council at large, I suppose, at risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to bring up the demolition waste aspect again. I know we agreed to include provisions of that nature in the official plan. We look to be at least another year away from that. And between the house and the swimming pool, especially in this regard, there will be several tons of concrete more than your typical demolition permit. And I'd like to add the provision of a construction waste management plan being submitted and approved prior to work.
Okay, can you repeat that, Councillor Peters?
Yeah, certainly. The whole thing, or just the amendment to the motion?
Right. You wish to amend this to add a waste management plan, is that correct?
Yeah, similar to projects that we had discussed in previous years when we have some large demolition projects. This doesn't mandate a percentage performance requirement. It just asks the demolition contractor, or perhaps the developer in this case, to think about the waste that's being created and have a plan for attempting to divert that. So it's not performance based. It's more just creating that thought process and starting to consider those measures for large scale waste diversion.
Okay. Mr. Jones, could you comment on this, please?
Certainly, Your Worship. My recollection is that this is an issue that Council dealt with some time ago. As Councillor Peters indicated, waste diversion measures are something that is going to be considered as part of the official plan. Council did receive a fairly detailed report on it. I can't recall specifically when. I believe it was about a year ago, and it discussed what is currently required under provincial legislation for larger projects and what is typically done for smaller projects. As what Councillor Peters is suggesting isn't performance based, it's really simply making a request of the applicant without this having any teeth. So truly there's no harm in adding it. And as we move forward with the OP review process, some specific policies can be crafted and included for the future.
Okay, so we have an amendment to this motion. Do we have a seconder for this?
I'll support it.
Councillor Andrews is supporting it. Okay, so let's call a vote on 10.6. All in favor? And no opposed. We're passing that unanimously with Councillor Peters' amendment. Thank you, councillors. 10.7. This is an item regarding Hydro Board of Directors and our unanimous shareholders agreement. And that is that the staff bring forward a bylaw to amend the unanimous shareholders agreement, putting 3-year terms and establishing a term limit on members of the Board of Directors of Orangeville Hydro Limited. Any councillors wish to ask any questions about this item? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve this. Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any further comments? All in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. 10.8, this is regarding town council and committee meetings, and it's regarding some additional electronic participation permissions that town staff has put forward to us. Can I have a motion on this item, please? Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any comments or questions from council? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Taylor, go right ahead.
I wanted to make sure I was unmuted before I spoke. Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to, I guess, Mr. Brennan, but I just want to make sure that, is this just for regular public meetings, or will this also pertain to closed sessions?
Your Worship, I will pass this back to Madam Clerk.
Mm-hmm. It includes closed meetings.
So it will all depend on legislation.
Well,
We may experience some difficulties here, but just for the council's information, there is legislation that's currently being proposed that will allow for participation in closed sessions electronically.
Okay, I grasp that, Your Worship. Okay. I grasp that, and I just wanted to make sure. And why that's important is some of us, I guess mainly myself, does travel, and we experienced this early on in our mandate, and that was we weren't able to attend some of the sessions because of remote nature. And I'm greatly in favor of this, and I think it adds the flexibility that council requires. So I thank staff for bringing this forward. You're muted, Mr. Mayor. You're still muted.
Councillor Peters and Councillor Andrews seconded this. Can we call a vote, please? All in favor? Very good. That passes unanimously. Moving on to 10.9, which is a signed variance application from AC Cannabis Corp. These folks are looking to put 3 signs on their building. The town staff is recommending that the variance be approved on the applicant obtaining a sign permit. Any questions from councillors on this item? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm just wondering, why is just the storefront sign not adequate enough? Why the need to have it on all sides of the building?
Okay, Madam Clerk will weigh in on this, please. Thank you.
The applicant had indicated that also received approval from the AGCO's office. So as a part of the licensing process with the province, they do have to get approval for their signage to the AGCO. And as a result, they've requested they just requested the additional signage.
Oh, they just did ask for additional. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you didn't hear that, Sherwood, the applicant has received approval from the Alcohol Gaming Commission of Ontario. A submission, they had to get their signage approved from them, and they just came to us looking to have those additional signs approved. We are going to be revisiting our sign bylaw going forward, and someone who's been in the sign business for 30 years, less is more in the sign business. That's what I firmly believe, and I think going forward, when we get to the sign bylaw review, hopefully we can put in place. But for now, it's we're going to call a vote on this. Do we have a motion here on this? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconder. Councillor Post, any further comments before we call a vote? Okay, all in favor of this? Opposed? Seeing none, that also passes. Okay, 11.1, we have correspondence from the Orangeville Blues and Jazz Festival. We did hear from President of that festival, Josh Leach, earlier, and this is a request that from them that they retain their $17,150 community grant that was provided to the festival in March 2020 prior to COVID. Do we have any questions from councillors on this matter? Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to, I'm not sure if it's going to be to Miss Landry or perhaps to Miss Syed, but with a number of our community grants that were granted, they were for events that are upcoming in 2020 or that were planned to be upcoming in 2020. Have we had conversation or dialogue with any of the other community grant recipients about what we were going to do with those funds at all, or have any of them reached out to return funds? I think we just have to be careful on what precedent we're setting either way, whatever we decide to do, and I'm just curious of what's been done so far. I asked that specifically because as one of the organizers for Celebrate Your Awesome, we had received a community grant from Dufferin County that we returned the majority of. We kept $1,000 to help us host our virtual event, but we returned the remaining $4,000. Same with our BIA grant. We're returning the $1,000 because we weren't able to use it, and we will then apply next year. So my question also is perhaps to Mr. Leach from the Blues and Jazz Festival is, if you want to keep this grant for the $17,150, is that going to be in lieu of asking for more funds next year, or will that be in addition to looking for more funds next year? So I've got a few questions in there, and I'm not sure who they're best directed to. But
well, let's start with the first one. If Madam Treasurer could weigh in on whether any the disposition of the other community grants, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Councillor Post. So we haven't heard from any of the other recipients in terms of what their plan is vis-a-vis their particular programs or their events. If council wishes, I can do further investigation and perhaps bring a report to council. Now, as council is aware, the community grant is approved by council. So if we are asking for these fundings to be returned to us, then I believe, and I would ask our clerk to weigh in on this, but I believe there needs to be some direction from council to me.
Right. I can tell you as a member of Dufferin County Council, this came up about a month ago, and the request was that all funds be returned to Dufferin County Council, and that was passed, I believe, unanimously by council at Dufferin County. Second question. Councillor Post, who are you directing that one to?
Whoever can answer it.
Mr. Leach, you're there, sir? Can you tell us what expenses you have in 2020 and whether this money, if we allow you to keep it, are you coming back to us in 2021?
So absolutely, I'll try and answer all of those questions or all of the points. As I outlined in my letter to council on June 24th, at that time and to that date, we had paid out over $74,000 in direct cost relative to the planning and booking for the 2020 festival. Obviously, that was before the pandemic and all of the constraints that were put on all of us around the world. We started planning in September, and there are these direct costs are festival insurance, performance cancellation deposits, fees, contractor staffing costs. As soon as we knew of the potential for postponing or canceling our 2020 festival, early March, I ended all of the contractor staffing contracts. We have festival scheduling, volunteer software, advertising, website administration, and just the general administration that goes along with keeping the lights on, telephone, bank charges, licensing, permits, etc. So that is what we spend the money on. I think the second question was, would we come back to once again partner with the town of Orangeville for the 2020 festival? The answer is absolutely yes. As I've outlined on page 2 of the letter that I sent to Council on June 24th, we're asking our partners, TD Bank, have provided us with $15,000. Central Counties Tourism, $10,000 received. Canadian Heritage, $9,100 in emergency funding. The BIA, $10,000 of the $40,000 that was granted this year, and the County of Dufferin, $3,000. The Orangeville Blues and Jazz Festival, we do have some funds in hand, so we're looking at about $10,000 from our emergency fund, and we're asking the town of Orangeville again as a partner for that $17,150 to help us go back to the planning table in September of 2020, and along with all of our partners and the town of Orangeville, put on an award-winning festival in 2021.
Okay, Councillor Sherwood has a question.
Yes, Your Worship. I am in support of them keeping these funds, but however, I think to be fair with regards to the community grant process, I think I'm probably going to put a motion forward that we ask the treasurer to reach out to all the grant receivers and get their plans if they have been canceled. What is the need if they are keeping the funds? And I think we need to get further direction from all the community grant receivers. So I don't know if I'm getting my point across, but I'm basically asking if staff could reach out to each of those. If they are definitely canceled in 2020, we need to find out what their intentions are. If they need an opportunity to use the funds for some type of advance similar to what the Blues and Jazz are suggesting, then we can make a decision on individual cases.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly my point, Councillor Sherwood, because that's what happened at County Council as well, was they looked at the needs. So we, as Celebrate Your Awesome, for example, were able to keep $1,000 of our $5,000 grant because that was the funds that we needed in order to host a virtual event. And Mr. Leach, on your behalf, I'm a little frustrated for you that you weren't able to get some of these funds carried over. I know we were very fortunate as an event with Celebrate Your Awesome that a bunch of our vendors actually took our deposits and moved it to next year so that we weren't out of pocket, and that helped us be able to stay and keep our bank account positive. So I'm frustrated for you that your vendors weren't quite as kind, perhaps. So thank you for your explanation, though.
Well, thank you, Councillor.
Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And just to echo both Councillor Sherwood and Councillor Post's point, in the case with the DCCRC, they're also another representative, that's the Dufferin County Cultural Resource Circle, which had to postpone their National Indigenous Peoples Day to September. That is still being discussed if it is going to run, but they have incurred some expenses even at this point. And so I think that as Councillor Sherwood has put forth a motion to have staff investigate, I think it's important to get some description and at least an update from the organizations who are the recipients of the community grants to find out exactly what is happening. Because I know that in many cases, until again today, with some of the discussions that have been made and the announcement by the provincial government with the increase of events to up to about 100 people, that still may not be enough to support a particular event activity. So I think that information will be very helpful for council to, on a per case basis, make some further decisions.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess in an attempt to sort of separate the motions between the exact issue here with Blues and Jazz and Councillor Sherwood's motion regarding the funding in general, I guess I'd like to speak a little bit more about the festival itself. And I appreciate Mr. Leachy being on the line and you submitting the letter and having incurred expenses and seeing no fruit from those. It must be very frustrating. But in your letter, you talk about having spent about 25% of the festival's budget, and yet 100% of the community grant is being requested. And, you know, that's the town taking on more than its share across other vendors and donors. So I'd support a motion for the 25% of the community grant to alleviate those costs as a proportion of the town arrangement. But I think jumping right to that 100% perhaps is more than I'd be willing to go.
Okay, so Councillor Peters, are you asking to amend this motion?
Can you repeat the motion, or do we have one?
Well, it's a request that the monies be left in the hands of the Blues and Jazz Festival, all of it. So
I suppose I would propose a motion to alleviate 25% of the grant and see where that heads.
Okay, well, in order to do that, you'll need a seconder, sir. So anybody out there would like to second that? Seeing none, we'll go back to this receiving the correspondence and the letter, and I guess really asking council to approve leaving this money in the hands and in the use of the Blues and Jazz Festival during the 2020 fiscal year. Any further comments before we vote on that?
I didn't get a seconder on my motion.
Okay, we need somebody to make that motion. Yes, well, we can deal with that after, right? It's not really tied into this, is it? Your request for staff to look into all of the grants, or do you want to wait until staff looks into the grants?
But they are part of the community grant receivers, so I think that they need to come back with everyone else and then we on an individual case. Yes. That's where I was heading, so that yes. we don't just take this one particular one, make a decision now. We take all of them and say, okay, canceled, and this is what we need the funds for.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not opposed to that at all, Councillor Sherwood. And so, councillors, this would be an amendment here to not make a decision tonight, to ask staff to go back and ask all of the community grant recipients what they're doing with their money, and then make the larger decision at a future council meeting. Is that correct, Councillor? Yes. Councillor Taylor, do you wish to second that, or do you wish to speak to that?
I will second it, but I would just like to make a quick comment, if I may, Your Worship. I think we're in absolutely the right on place, and I apologize, Councillor Peters, that I couldn't second your motion, and I want to explain why I didn't. It's just felt arbitrary to me to come up with 25%. I like where we're going now, which is more of a detailed approach and having everyone come back. The caveat would be I think you should only come back if you've canceled your event. And specifically, I think about my friends in the Optimist Club. At this point, Christmas in the Park is still a go. There is no need for the Optimists to come back to council. They have not confirmed or shared that they're canceling. So we shouldn't waste groups like that time. But if you have canceled and you still require funds, I think you should come back.
Well, I don't know asking the question as a waste, Councillor Taylor. All they have to do is say, we're still moving ahead. And just so we have a complete report.
That's fair, but nothing's changed, right? And we've already approved that. So why would we have them prepare some extra dialogue? It would just be, nothing's changed since we've been approved. I just don't want to waste these are community events, and Your Worship, you and I know well and above, it's difficult time-wise and whatnot. I don't want to create time for a volunteer organization that's already going ahead.
Oh, okay. But I do think is it not just an email to the president with a response?
If that's all it is, then great.
I think that's all it is.
Okay.
Madam Treasurer, you would be sending an email to each grant recipient and just asking them what the disposition of the money is and whether their program is going to run this year or not. Is that correct?
Your Worship, if that's what Council wishes, yes.
Councillor Peters.
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just through you, Councillor Taylor, as a point of clarity, 25% was not an arbitrary number. On page 3 of the letter, they said they had incurred 25% of their expected budget. And so proportionally, I thought that amount represented how much from each donor should be allocated to cover the costs. But I appreciate your explanation.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Okay, so I think on the floor we have Councillor Sherwood's motion to ask staff to go back and ask each recipient of community grants and you know, this is a brief report back to council at a future council meeting, and so we can look at it in its entirety, the grant program, and make a decision either individually or on group. Right?
And in this particular case, they have an opportunity to say our event is canceled. However, we have these expenses, and this is our ask. And I think we need to do that for all of our community grants. Some of the events have already happened, so it's just a clear cut. Those will be clean and simple.
Right. In Councillor Taylor's case with the optimists, it's just a simple yes. We're planning to carry on and have our Christmas in the parking then. Yeah. Okay. All right. Does somebody want a second, Councillor Sherwood?
Councillor Taylor did already.
I'm sorry. Councillor Taylor already did. I'm sorry. Any further comments from councillors on that? Okay, all in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. So, Mr. Leach, if you're still on, we'll be back to you. We haven't made a final decision yet, sir. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor.
All the best. All right, we have 11.2 now, correspondence. This is regarding Township of East Carriffraxa, notice of receipt of a complete application and notice of a public meeting for proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Can we have a motion to receive that correspondence? Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any further commentary or questions here? Seeing none, all in favor? That passes unanimously. And then on to 11.3, which was correspondence from a Mr. Darren Woods regarding new housing street names. Can we have a motion to receive that correspondence? Councillor Post, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Any further comment on that particular item? All right, I'll call the vote. All in favor of receiving this? That passes unanimously. Although I read all the names, we did not receive them. So I'm going to have a motion now to receive 11.4 through, let's see, the end here, 11.55. Correspondences received from various residents and community groups. We have a motion to receive those items. Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any further comment? All in favor? Okay, question period. Do we have any? We have no questions. Very good. Moving on to committee and board minutes. So the recommendation that minutes of the following meetings be received. That is 13.1, Business and Economic Development from December 3rd, 2019. Cultural Plan Task Force, September 18th, 2019. Orangeville BIA of May 21st, 2020, and 1344 is Orangeville Library Board of May 27th. Motion to receive those minutes, please. Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Any further comment or questions on those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Okay. Notice of motion prior to meeting. Councillors, Madam Clerk, there was none, is that correct? Okay. Notice of motion at meeting. Councillor Peters, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This came up last week when we talked about the official plan review, and I spoke with Mr. Ward and Mr. Jones earlier today about what the composition of a steering committee or advisory committee may look like, with all the planning applications sort of in the works, and with the importance of the official plan and its update over the course of the next year. I'll be working on that with Mr. Ward to try and get some composition of that committee and sort of what its role may be. So I'll work on that language for the August 10th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And then, if you don't mind, I had another one that I didn't get to the clerk ahead of time. Again, this is just a notice, but we've discussed this a little bit as well. So part of the Cycling and Trails Master Plan included a variety of recommendations, one of which was bike lanes along Centennial. And with the redesign and construction of Centennial over the next year or two, I'd like to craft a motion for next meeting to include full cycling lanes along the stretch of Centennial for the length of that construction. It's a very good route to sort of bisect the town and connect the neighborhoods that are already served by some of the on-street cycling networks.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. I wanted to ask Madam Clerk a question under this category. Madam Clerk, presume all the motions that happen in council that you've got them on a spreadsheet. You're keeping. Sorry.
They're in the minutes.
But is there some further documentation of the progress of motions, outstanding matters? Is that something that you could share with us, councillors, and maybe with the public in some more transparent way? Because we have lots of items and we're not following them all the time. I'm just thinking of the issue that came up on the naturalization. That was something that kind of got lost, and it took 11 months, for instance, to come back to us. And I just wondering if we could have our eyes on something like that. And is that something that we can do, or do you need some direction from council on that?
I don't want to turn this on, Mr. Mayor. Can you just maybe know that we'll look into it with staff and we'll get back to you?
Okay, so Madam Clerk has suggested that she will look into that and report back to council. So rather than making a motion or anything of that matter right now, we'll leave it in the capable hands of Madam Clerk. Thank you very much. Any other notices of motion by councillors at the meeting? Seeing none, new business. Any councillors like to speak to? Yes, Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief update for council. So at the CBC board meeting last week, we discussed the Subwatershed 19 study, which of course encompasses the Orangeville area. And you'll recall discussions regarding the existing fire hall land and its impacts on the updated study, that sort of thing. So I've been speaking with the clerk and getting a representative from CBC to present that subwatershed study to us next month, which will hopefully inform any decisions going forward about that property.
Very good, thank you. Councillors, any other new business? Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly, as we've been speaking about some great community organizations and how they've reacted to COVID-19, we do have our Rotary Rib Fest, which is coming up this weekend, and they have adapted the way that they're doing it to have a drive-through opportunity at the Headwaters Rocket Club. So you can drive through and pick up your ribs and enjoy a live-streamed concert from the Campfire Poets. So I hope everybody will attend and support the Rotary Club.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Post, for that reminder. Okay, councillors, anything further? Seeing nothing, we'll move on to bylaws. So there's a recommendation that bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally pass. The bylaw to amend bylaw 021-209 being the boards and committees bylaw for the town of Orangeville, and B, a bylaw to provide for the levy and collection of a special charge upon rateable property in the Orangeville Business Improvement Area in the corporation of the town of Orangeville for the year 2020. And C, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the corporation of the town of Orangeville at its regular council meeting held July 13, 2020. May I have a motion for those bylaws? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any comments on that? All in favor? Thank you, and a motion to adjourn, please. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Taylor, all in favor? Thank you, everyone. All the best.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone. Take care.